Every morning, before the palace was awake, before the imperial secretaries arrived with their reports, before the generals presented their dispatches, before any obligation of the most demanding job in the ancient world began, Marcus Aurelius sat alone and wrote, not correspondence, not policy, not history, note to himself, reminders of what he kept forgetting, corrections of errors he had made the day before, instructions for the person he was trying to become. The Meditations, the book that has remained continuously in print for 1800 years, translated into every major language, read by heads of state, military commanders, philosophers, and ordinary people across every century since its discovery, was written exclusively in these pre-dawn hours. It was never edited, never prepared for publication, never intended to be seen. It was a morning practice, and it was the foundation of everything Marcus Aurelius managed to sustain across 20 years of governing an empire in crisis. Modern neuroscience has now documented with precision why the specific structure of his morning practice produced the outcomes it produced. The Stoics arrived at it through philosophical reasoning. The research has arrived at it through brain imaging, cortisol measurement, and longitudinal studies of cognitive performance. The conclusions are identical, and the practice is available to anyone willing to apply it. Book 4 of the Meditations opens with one of the most disarmingly honest passages in all of ancient literature. Marcus writes, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being." The Emperor of Rome had difficulty getting out of bed in the morning. He recorded it without embarrassment because these journals were for no one but himself, and then he records the argument he used to overcome it. Not inspiration, not excitement. A simple, precise reminder of purpose. The work exists, the human being has a function. The function requires showing up. The first practice Marcus performed each morning was philosophical orientation, a brief, structured review of the principles he intended to live by in the coming day. The Stoics called this the morning meditation, and its structure was specific. It had 3 components. The first was the reminder of difficulty, what Stoics called the premeditatio, or premeditation. Marcus would remind himself that the day ahead would contain frustrating people, unwanted circumstances, and events outside his control. He did this not to produce pessimism, but to eliminate surprise. Surprise is the mechanism of reactive emotional response. Remove surprise by anticipating difficulty, and the response to difficulty can be chosen rather than automatic. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. And then, but I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." The anticipation neutralizes the surprise. The context, shared human nature, neutralizes the resentment. He arrived at each day's difficulties already equipped. The neuroscience of this practice is documented. A 2016 study published in Clinical Psychological Science found that mental simulation of anticipated stressors, imagining in advance how difficult events would unfold and how one would respond, produced measurably lower cortisol responses when those events actually occurred, compared to groups who had not performed the anticipatory simulation. The brain had already processed the threat. The stress response was partially spent before the event arrived. The Stoics called this preparation. The research calls it stress inoculation. The mechanism is the same. The second component of Marcus's morning practice is the one that most directly separates his approach from every modern morning routine in the self-help literature. He did not visualize success. He did not rehearse achievement. He did not prime himself for motivation. He reminded himself that he was going to die, not as a thought experiment, as a daily discipline. And the research on why this specific practice produces the cognitive outcomes it produces is among the most counterintuitive in all of psychology. Marcus wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This sentence was written each morning as an operational instruction, not a philosophical reflection. It determined the priority structure of the day. It eliminated the category of not urgent enough to deal with today. It made the present moment the only relevant unit of time. The psychological mechanism is terror management theory, developed by Greenberg, Pischinsky, and Solomon, and now backed by over 500 peer-reviewed studies. The research consistently shows that mortality salience, conscious awareness of one's own death, when processed deliberately rather than avoided, produces measurable increases in authentic value alignment, meaningful engagement, and reduction in status seeking and superficial goal pursuit. A 219 study published in the European Journal of Social Psychology found that participants who performed a brief daily mortality awareness exercise for 2 weeks reported significantly higher levels of meaning in life, greater clarity about personal values, and lower levels of existential anxiety than control groups, not higher anxiety. Lower, the avoidance of mortality produces existential anxiety. The engagement with it resolves it. Marcus Aurelius knew this. He built it into his morning as deliberately as a modern executive builds a calendar review into their start-of-day routine, because it served the same function: orientation, priority setting, determination of what actually mattered in the hours ahead. The third component of his morning practice was writing itself, the act of articulating principles, corrections, and intentions in written form, which is what the Meditations document is. Not merely a record-keeping exercise. It is a cognitive practice with specific and well-documented neurological effects. A 2006 study by James Pennebaker and Jen L. Segal found that expressive writing, the articulation of thoughts and principles in written form, produced measurable improvements in working memory, cognitive clarity, and emotional regulation. The act of translating internal experience into written language requires the prefrontal cortex to organize, sequence, and evaluate the material. This organizational process produces the clarity that Marcus was seeking. He was not writing to remember. He was writing to think. The writing was the thinking. And the thinking, performed each morning before any external demand arrived, established the cognitive and emotional architecture for the day. The Stoic morning practice has a counterpart that is equally documented and equally important: the evening review. Seneca described it in On Anger, written in 49 AD. He documented his own nightly practice in precise terms. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. He then describes 3 questions he applied to each day. Where did I fall short? Where did I improve? What could I have done better? Not as self-punishment. Seneca explicitly states, I do not accuse myself roughly. I'm not harsh on myself. The review is analytical, not penal. Its purpose is data collection, identifying where the gap between intention and action exists, so that the gap can be reduced. The Pythagoreans, a philosophical community that predated the Stoics and whom the Stoics credited with developing this practice, described the evening review with a verse attributed to Pythagoras himself. Do not let sleep fall upon your eyes until you have reviewed the events of the day 3 times. Where did I go wrong? What did I achieve? What duty was left undone? This practice has a precise modern equivalent. In organizational psychology, it is called an after-action review, a structured post-event analysis developed by the United States Army in the 1970s and now used across military, medical, and high-performance organizational contexts globally. The after-action review asks 4 questions. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? Why was there a difference? What do we do differently next time? These are the same questions Seneca asked himself each night in the 1st century AD. The mechanism, using the events of a day as developmental feedback rather than simply allowing them to pass, is the same. The research confirming its effectiveness is extensive. A 2014 study published in Psychological Science found that participants who spent 15 minutes at the end of each workday writing about what they had learned produced, over 10 days, a 23% improvement in performance compared to a control group that simply continued working. The reflection produced more growth than the additional effort would have. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations are in their entirety the record of this evening review process conducted over decades. They are not a philosophical treatise assembled for publication. They are the raw output of nightly self-examination, the emperor holding himself accountable and writing to the standards he had set in the morning. The book that has influenced world leaders, military commanders, and philosophers for 18 centuries was not written to influence anyone. It was written by a man checking his own work at the end of each day. That is the actual source of its power, not its philosophical conclusions, but the discipline of the practice that produced them. The Stoic morning and evening practice, distilled from the historical record and confirmed by the research, has the following structure. Morning, 15 minutes before any external input, 5 minutes of anticipatory preparation. Name 3 things that are likely to be difficult today. Not to dread them, to remove their capacity for surprise. Decide in advance how you intend to respond when they arrive. 5 minutes of mortality orientation. A single, direct acknowledgement. This day was not guaranteed. There is no contract for tomorrow. What would make today worth having lived independent of outcome? 5 minutes of written intention. 1 sentence. Not a goal. Not a task. An intention about the kind of person you will be in the coming hours. Not what you will achieve, what you will be. Evening, 10 minutes before sleep. 3 questions answered in writing. Where did today's actions diverge from today's intentions? What worked? What requires correction tomorrow? No judgment, only observation. The data is the point. This is the practice Marcus Aurelius used to govern the Roman Empire for 20 years under conditions that would have broken most people in a fraction of the time. It is available in its entirety, with no equipment, no subscription, and no prior philosophical training. The only requirement is 15 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night. every day, without exception. Marcus Aurelius managed it while governing 70 million people. The argument that the schedule does not permit it does not survive examination. In Book 10 of the Meditations, Marcus wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This is not sentiment. From a man who had buried children, fought decades of war, survived multiple political crises, and watched the empire fracture around him, this sentence is the documented output of a practice that deliberately cultivated the recognition of what was already present, not what was coming, not what had been lost, what was present. Right now, the morning practice built this recognition, deliberately, every day. That is why the Meditations reads the way it does, not as a philosophical treatise, but as a conversation between a person and the version of themselves they are trying to become. That conversation is available to every person watching this. It starts tomorrow morning, 15 minutes before anything else. Comments are open. Let me know, what is the one thing you intend to build into your morning starting tomorrow? Next, why the Stoics did not merely tolerate failure, and why their specific relationship to failure is, according to the research, the single most accurate predictor of long-term achievement across every domain studied. See you in the next one.